My name is Harold Simmons, and I'm 68 years old. I spent 34 years as a high school football coach in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm going to tell you something that happened last Christmas that I still think about almost every day. Not because it hurt me, it did, at first, but because of what I did about it and who I became on the other side of it. Let me start with the house. 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Ridge Drive, bought it in 1991 for $142,000. My wife Evelyn and I raised our 3 kids there, coached hundreds of other people's sons on Friday nights. But that house was where I raised mine, and my daughter. Connor, my oldest, is 40 now. Works in corporate finance in Chicago. Then there's my daughter Paige, 37, married to a guy named Doug who sells pharmaceutical equipment and does pretty well with it. And then there's my youngest, Trevor, 34, who teaches architecture at Ohio State and lives about 12 minutes from the house I still lived in alone. Evelyn died 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 91 days from diagnosis to funeral. It was fast and brutal, and it broke something in me that I've spent 4 years trying to piece back together. The house was hers just as much as mine. Maybe more. She's the one who picked out the yellow in the kitchen, who planted the rose bushes along the fence, who made Christmas feel like Christmas. After she passed, I kept all of it going. I'm not the kind of man who folds. 34 years coaching teenagers taught me that much. I learned to cook Evelyn's recipes by calling her sister twice a week. I learned how to keep the rose bushes alive by watching YouTube videos at 11 at night. I put up the outdoor lights every December myself on a ladder at 64 years old. Not because I had to, because I wanted my kids to pull into that driveway and feel something, feel her still there. Christmas was the big one, always had been, even more so after we lost her. I started planning in October. I know people roll their eyes at that, but when you're feeding 17 people, 3 kids, 3 spouses, 8 grandchildren between ages 4 and 16, plus my brother-in-law Frank who didn't have anywhere else to go, you plan in October. I made a spreadsheet. Evelyn always made a spreadsheet. This year I budgeted $520 for the Christmas dinner. That's not nothing on a pension. I retired on a teacher's salary, and between my Ohio State teacher's retirement and Social Security, I bring in about $3,100 a month. The $520 was close to a sixth of that. I didn't care. You don't put a price on the last people who share your name sitting around a table together. I ordered a prime rib roast from the butcher shop on High Street, the good one, 10 pounds, because Connor had said 3 years ago it was the best thing he'd ever eaten, and I'd never forgotten that. I bought Evelyn's pie recipe ingredients: brown sugar, sweet potato, apple with the sharp cheddar crust, pecan. I ordered the good sparkling grape juice for the grandkids. I bought a case of wine and drove 30 minutes to get the specific bourbon Trevor likes in his eggnog, because he'd mentioned it once in passing and I'd written it down. First week of December, I deep cleaned the whole house, polished the dining room table until I could see my own face in it, set out Evelyn's Christmas village on the mantel, each piece in exactly the place she used to put them. Because my youngest granddaughter Lily had asked me last year if we could keep it the same way Grandma did it. I said yes. I meant it. I was in the kitchen on a Tuesday night, the 14th of December, grating the good Gruyere for the au gratin potatoes. I was prepping ahead. My hands were greasy and my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it. Almost. It was an iMessage notification. A group added me to something called The Three of Us. I'd never seen it before. I figured it was some new family thread they'd started, maybe to coordinate gifts or arrivals. I dried my hands on the dish towel and opened it. My daughter had added me by mistake. I found out later her finger slipped while she was trying to forward a message to me from the main family chat. What I saw instead was months of conversation I was never meant to read. I scrolled up. My hands went cold. December 3rd. Connor. Anyone actually planning to do Dad's Christmas thing? Meredith's family is doing a trip to Park City this year, and honestly that sounds incredible compared to standing in that house looking at Mom's decorations for 4 hours. Paige, I know. It's a lot. He gets so intense about it. Like we have to sit in the exact same seats and eat dinner at the exact same time, and it's sweet but also kind of suffocating. Trevor. I've been trying to figure out how to have the conversation with him. It's getting harder to make the drive with the kids when they have things going on. Connor, does anyone want to just be honest with him? Paige, you be honest with him. You see how that went when I suggested we do Christmas Eve instead of Christmas Day 2 years ago? He cried. Connor. He actually got emotional over what day we eat prime rib. Trevor. He's just lonely. It's not his fault, but it's a lot of pressure on us to be his whole social life. Connor. It's not healthy, honestly. We're not responsible for his emotional state. We have our own families. I stopped. Read that last line 3 times. We're not responsible for his emotional state. I coached kids for 34 years. I watched boys lose their fathers, their confidence, their way. I drove 2 of my players to rehab myself. I attended 6 funerals for former students. I spent a career teaching young people that the way you show up for the people who need you is the measure of who you are. I kept reading. December 9th. Paige. Okay, so Doug's mom invited us to Scottsdale for Christmas, the whole week. His sister rented a house with a pool. The kids are dying to go. I feel terrible, but also it sounds amazing. Trevor, I mean, if you're going, then honestly, Jen and I might do something with her parents. We haven't done that in 3 years. Connor, so nobody's going. Paige, maybe we just all text him on like the 22nd? Separate excuses so it doesn't look coordinated. Work stuff is always believable for you, Connor. I'll do something with the kids being sick. Trevor, this feels bad. Paige, Trevor. He'll be fine. He's not fragile. He survived losing Mom. He can survive one Christmas. Connor, and honestly, maybe it wakes him up a little. He needs to build a life outside of us. Friends his own age. Hobbies. He can't keep treating Christmas like it's some sacred obligation we owe him. Paige. Agreed. He needs this. It's almost like we're doing him a favor. I set my phone down on the cutting board next to the pile of grated Gruyere. I stood in my kitchen, the one Evelyn picked out in 1991, under the light she chose, surrounded by the smell of the food I was making for people who were coordinating their excuses to not come eat it. I'm not a man who cries easily. I didn't cry at my own father's funeral. I held Evelyn's hand for 91 days without breaking down in front of her once, because I didn't want her last memories to be of me falling apart. But standing there with cheese on my hands and my phone on the cutting board, I cried. Not the lost, helpless kind, the angry kind, the kind that clarifies things. I looked at the photograph of Evelyn on the windowsill above the sink. She's laughing in it, head thrown back, taken at Connor's wedding 9 years ago. She was the most joyful person I ever knew. Tell me what to do, I said out loud, the way I'd been saying it for 4 years. And I knew. I've always believed she answers me somehow. I know how that sounds. I don't care. She answers me, and what I heard was, don't cancel, don't confront, show them. I went back to the Gruyere. I want to be honest about something. I didn't sleep much those next few nights. I reread those messages more times than I should have. Each time I found something new to sting me. The part where Paige said Christmas was suffocating. The part where Connor said he wasn't responsible for my emotional state, like I was some kind of inconvenient liability. The part where they decided, together, that standing me up would be doing me a favor. I thought about calling them. I thought about forwarding the thread back to all 3 of them with no comment. I thought about a lot of things. What I decided was this. I was going to finish preparing the best Christmas dinner I'd ever made. And I was going to share it with people who actually wanted to be there. The text arrived on the 22nd exactly as planned. Connor first, mid-morning. Dad, I'm really sorry. Client emergency blew up this week. Have to fly to New York on the 24th and I don't know when I'm getting back. Meredith sends her love. We'll do something in January for sure. Then Paige at noon, Dad. Lily has had a fever since yesterday, 101. She's miserable. We're not going to risk getting everyone sick. I'm so sorry. Then Trevor, at 2 in the afternoon. Hey, Dad. Bad news. Jen's dad took a fall and they think it might be his hip. We need to be with her family right now. I'm sorry to do this. I texted each of them back the same thing. I understand. Please take care of yourselves. I love you. They were clean, coordinated lies. I knew it. They didn't know I knew it. I spent the rest of that day making calls. First, I called my old assistant coach, Wendell, who retired 3 years ago and whose wife had passed 6 months back. He'd been to one family thing since the funeral, and I knew he'd been rattling around his house alone. I told him I had a prime rib going on Christmas Day and too much food for one person. He said he'd be there at noon. Then I posted to the Maple Ridge Neighborhood Facebook group, which had about 340 members. I wrote, "Retired coach here. Made way too much Christmas dinner for one person. If you're spending the holiday alone and would like a home-cooked meal, my doors open at 2 p.m. on December 25th. No need to bring anything. Address in the DMs." Then I called First Lutheran, where Evelyn and I had been members for 23 years, talked to Pastor Mills. He said he knew of 3 families and an elderly man, Mr. Kowalski, who had no local family and nowhere to go on Christmas. He'd pass along my information. By 10 that night, I had 9 people confirmed. Wendell, a widow named Dorothy who lived 6 blocks away, 2 college students from Ohio State, friends of one of Trevor's former students, who couldn't afford flights home to Iowa for the holiday, a man named Hector who'd come to Columbus from Guatemala 11 years ago and still found American Christmas customs a little bewildering but had learned to love the food, an elderly woman named Lorraine who'd outlived her husband and both of her sisters, and who Pastor Mills said hadn't had a proper Christmas dinner in 3 years, and a family, a young couple, Darnell and Simone, and their 6-year-old son Marcus, who were new to the neighborhood and hadn't yet built the kind of connections that fill up the holidays. I went to bed that night with a feeling I hadn't had since before Evelyn died. A sense of rightness, like the compass had stopped spinning. Christmas morning I was up at 5:30. The prime rib went in at 6 low and slow. I made Evelyn's brown sugar sweet potato pie from memory by then, made the au gratin potatoes, made the green beans with the crispy shallots she used to make for every holiday, made the cranberry sauce, the dinner rolls from scratch, the eggnog with the good bourbon, because I bought it and somebody ought to enjoy it. By 10 in the morning, the house smelled like Christmas, like every Christmas since 1991. At 11, the doorbell rang. It was a woman from the Columbus Dispatch, their features reporter, a sharp young woman named Isabel, and a photographer. I'd called their tip line the week before, told them I was a retired football coach who'd been left alone on Christmas after 30 years of hosting, and that I'd decided to open my home to strangers instead. She'd called me back in 20 minutes. She walked in and stopped in the doorway. "Mr. Perp, Simmons," she said. "This is incredible." The table was set for 12. Evelyn's good china, the set we got as a wedding gift in 1985. Christmas crackers at each setting. Name cards in my handwriting. Candles. Her crystal glasses. The Christmas village on the mantel, every piece where Lily had said she wanted it kept. Isabel asked me to walk her through the story. I told her about Evelyn. I told her about the 34 years of coaching. I told her about the Christmas dinners, all of them, the seating charts and the recipes and the rose bushes and the spreadsheets. I didn't mention the group chat. I didn't mention my kids by name. I said only that my family hadn't been able to make it this year and that I'd decided the food and the house and the day were too good to go to waste. "What do you want people to take from this?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment. "That community doesn't require blood," I said. "That showing up for each other is a choice, and that the choice matters more than the biology." She wrote that down word for word. I watched her do it. My guests started arriving just before 2. Wendell came first, wearing his good sport coat, carrying a bottle of Crown Royal he definitely did not need to bring. He walked in and stood in the living room and looked around and said quietly, "She would have loved this, Harold." I had to take a breath. Hector came next with a pan of tamales and an apology for bringing food when I'd said not to. I told him the tamales were welcome, and he grinned like I'd given him a gift. Dorothy arrived with her dog-eared copy of a crossword puzzle book and nothing else, exactly as instructed, and she sat right down at the kitchen table and started telling me about the rose bushes she'd been struggling with in her backyard. And by the time she finished, I told her about Evelyn's, and we were already friends. The college students, two young women named Becca and Sage, helped me carry dishes to the table and put on Christmas music, and within 30 minutes it seemed like they'd always been there. Lorraine arrived in her good Sunday dress and sat beside Marcus, the 6-year-old, and spent the first 20 minutes showing him how to properly shake a Christmas cracker, which he found endlessly funny. Darnell and Simone brought their warmth and their curiosity and a bottle of sparkling cider they said Marcus had picked out himself. We sat down at 2:15. I said grace. I've said grace at this table for decades. I've said it with 17 people, and I said it that day with 12 strangers who weren't strangers anymore. Lord, thank you for this food and for this house and for these people who chose to be here. Thank you for the ones we carry with us. Help us remember that love is a decision, not an accident. Amen. Amen went around the table. The prime rib was perfect. The potatoes were perfect. Hector's tamales went in the middle of the table, and Marcus had 3 of them. Lorraine had 2 pieces of sweet potato pie. Wendell and Darnell talked Ohio State football for 45 minutes, like they'd been friends for years. Dorothy and Simone figured out they'd both lived in the same neighborhood in Cincinnati in the 90s and couldn't believe it. Isabel's photographer moved around the table quietly. Nobody seemed to mind. At 4:30, Isabel thanked me and said the story would run in the next day's digital edition, and possibly the print edition on the 27th. She said, "I want you to know, Mr. Simmons, this is the best story I've covered this year." I thanked her. I meant it. My guests left between 5 and 6, each one hugging me at the door. Lorraine held on a little longer than the rest. Darnell told me they'd just found their community in Columbus and that this was the first time it really felt like home. Wendell, lost to leave, put his hand on my shoulder at the door and said, "Same time next year?" I said, "I'll call you in October." I washed the dishes, put Evelyn's china back in the cabinet, left the Christmas village on the mantel, poured myself a small glass of the bourbon eggnog, and sat in my armchair with the lights on the tree blinking slow the way Evelyn always set them. Not the fast ones, the slow ones, and I sat with her photograph and felt, for the first time in 4 years, like I was going to be all right. My phone started ringing at 7:40. Connor. I watched it ring. He called again. I watched it ring again. At 8:15 the text started. "Dad, we saw the Dispatch article. Are you okay? Please call me." Then Paige, "Dad, what is this? Call me. I'm worried." Then Trevor, "Dad, I just saw the article. I'm coming over. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you've ever felt like the people you love most have stopped seeing you, really seeing you, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from." I put my phone face down on the side table, sat with the slow lights and the eggnog and my wife's photograph. The doorbell rang at 8:45. Through the front window, I could see Trevor's car in the driveway. Then Paige's SUV pulled up behind it. Then Connor, who I knew was supposed to be in New York, which meant the New York story had been a lie, which I'd already known, but which still landed somewhere uncomfortable to confirm. I did not answer the door. I heard them talking on the porch. Heard Trevor say, "Dad, come on, please." Heard Paige say, "I know you're in there. The lights are on." Heard Connor's voice, lower, more controlled, the negotiator in him taking over even when he's the one who should be apologizing. I sat in my armchair. I sipped my eggnog. I looked at Evelyn. I said, "I think this is the part where it gets better." They knocked for 22 minutes. Then they left. The next morning, I had an appointment I'd made 2 weeks before, right after reading that group chat. 9 a.m., Harrington and Cole, estate attorneys, over on Broad Street. I'd worked with Warren Harrington when Evelyn passed, and I trusted him. He stood when I came in. We shook hands. He knew me well enough to skip the small talk. "I need to update my will," I said. We spent 2 hours on it. The house, which has appreciated to $630,000 since 1991, my retirement savings, about $195,000. My life insurance policy, $150,000. Total estate, approximately $975,000. When Warren read back the final distribution, he did it in his careful, measured voice, the Columbus Community Foundation to administer 2 funds, one for youth athletics programs in underserved Columbus schools and one specifically endowed in Evelyn's name to support first-generation college students pursuing education degrees at Ohio State. Together, they'd receive 85% of the estate. First Lutheran Church would receive 8%. My brother-in-law Frank would receive 4%. My 3 children would share the remaining 3%, approximately $9,750 split 3 ways, just under $3,250 each. Warren set down the documents. Harold, they're going to be upset. They already are, I said. They're just upset about the wrong things right now. He witnessed it. His paralegal witnessed it. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years, which is a strange thing to feel after giving away nearly $1 million. But that's exactly what it felt like. They came back on the 27th, all 3 of them, Saturday morning, standing on my porch when I opened the door. Connor with his hands in his coat pockets, Paige with red eyes, Trevor looking at the mat. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Cold morning. The rose bushes were bare. The oak tree in the front yard, the one Evelyn and I planted the summer we bought the house, had 3 inches of snow on its upper branches. Connor spoke first, because Connor always speaks first. Dad, we owe you an apology. A real one. What we did was wrong. Which part? I said. Paige blinked. What? Which part are you apologizing for? Planning to leave me alone for Christmas? Coordinating the lies? Calling my traditions suffocating? Or only because the newspaper article made it public? Silence. The snow made the morning very quiet. Trevor said, We're apologizing for all of it. Good, I said. Then you should know I saw the group chat. Paige, you added me to it by accident on the 14th. I read everything. Paige put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. I didn't confront you, I said. I thought about it. I decided it would be more useful to show you what you were throwing away than to argue about whether you threw it. Dad, Connor said. We can explain to me, I said quietly, how there's a good context for the 3 of you agreeing that my feelings are my problem and not yours. I'll wait. He didn't have an answer. Nobody did. I wasn't cruel about it. I want to be clear about that. There was no yelling, no performance of anger. I just said it straight, the way I used to talk to a player who'd made a bad decision on the field. Not to destroy them, to make them understand the weight of it. I told them about the will. Connor's jaw tightened the way it does when he's calculating. Paige cried harder. Trevor looked like he'd been hit. That's our inheritance, Connor said. It's my money, I said. Earned by your mother and me over 40 years. I'm going to leave it somewhere it does some lasting good. The Evelyn Simmons Education Fund will put first-generation kids through Ohio State for as long as the endowment holds. That seems like a better use than the passive income you were counting on. It's not about the money, Paige said, though her voice wasn't fully convincing. Then it shouldn't change how you treat me, I said. Are you selling the house? Trevor asked. I'm looking at options, I said. There's a 55-plus community out near Worthington that has a pool, woodworking shop, hiking trails, communal dinners, waitlist I got on 3 weeks ago. I'm also looking at a smaller place over by the park if I want to stay in the neighborhood. Haven't decided. But this is the house, Paige started. Your mother loved this house, I said. I've been tending it for 4 years so you'd have somewhere to come home to. You decided you didn't want to come home, so I'm going to decide what's best for me. It went quiet again. Then the front door cracked open. I'd forgotten. Lily, Paige's youngest, 12 years old, had been dropped off by Doug that morning before Paige had driven over. She'd let herself in with the spare key. She'd been inside the whole time. She came out onto the porch in her socks, no coat, looked at her mother and her uncles and then at me and said, Grandpa, are you moving? Maybe, sweetheart. Her face did something complicated. But where will we have Christmas? I crouched down to her level. Wherever we are, we'll have Christmas. But Grandma's village is here. I'll take it with me. Every piece. I promise. She leaned in and hugged me, arms tight around my neck the way she's done since she was 3. I held on. When she went back inside, I stood up and looked at my 3 children. Paige was crying without trying to stop it. Trevor looked at the ground. Even Connor's composure had slipped a little. "I love you," I said. "All 3 of you. That's not in question. But I've been treating your attention like something I have to earn, and I've been doing it since the day your mother died. I cooked bigger meals. I bought better wine. I put up more lights. Like if I just made it nice enough, made myself useful enough, you'd choose me. I'm done with that." "Dad," Trevor started. "Let me finish," I said. "If you want to be in my life going forward, I want you in it. Genuinely. Not obligated, not guilty, not managed. I want you to call me because you want to talk. I want you to come over because you want to be here. I want you to be honest with me instead of coordinating lies in a chat I wasn't supposed to see. That's what I want. If you want to give me that, I'm right here. If it takes time to get there, that's okay. But I'm not chasing you anymore." Paige said, "Can we come in?" I thought about it. "Come back Sunday. I'll make breakfast. We'll talk then. For now, I'd like my morning." They left. I went inside, turned on the percolator, sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light Evelyn picked out in 1991, and let the quiet be quiet. The article ran in print on the 27th. Then a local TV segment picked it up. Channel 4, a quick piece on their evening news about the Columbus coach who turned loneliness into community. It was 3 minutes long. My phone ran hot for 2 days. Former players calling. Parents of players I'd coached in the 90s. Colleagues I hadn't spoken to in a decade. Neighbors I didn't know watched the news. My old athletic director, who's 81 now, left me a voicemail that made me laugh for the first time in a while. Sunday, I made breakfast. Bacon, eggs, biscuits from scratch, the good coffee. All 3 kids came. Their spouses stayed home by mutual agreement. This was family business, just us. We sat at the kitchen table and talked for 4 hours. Real talking, not the surface-level holiday talking we've been doing for years. Connor talked about the pressure he was under, and how it had made him pull away from everything that felt demanding, including me. He didn't apologize for that specifically, but he named it, and naming it was something. Paige talked about how scared she'd been since losing Evelyn, how she'd been managing her grief by keeping busy and keeping distance, how the thought of getting close to me and then losing me the way they lost their mother had been too much to face directly. That one took me a minute. I hadn't thought about it that way. Trevor said the least, but at the end he said, "Dad, I'm sorry I let you be more alone than you needed to be. I live 12 minutes away. That's not acceptable." He meant it. I could tell. I didn't change my will. I want to be clear about that. That money is doing what it should do. The Evelyn Simmons Education Fund gave its first scholarship in April. A young woman from the east side of Columbus, first person in her family to go to college, wants to be a 3rd-grade teacher. I went to the award ceremony at Ohio State. All 3 of my kids came with me. When the young woman gave her remarks and mentioned my wife's name, I heard Paige let out a slow breath beside me, the kind that means something shifted. After the ceremony, we all went to dinner. Big table at a restaurant on the riverfront. Kids, grandkids, Dorothy, who I'd been spending time with since January, Wendell and his daughter who was visiting. Lily sat beside me and showed me drawings she'd done at school. Connor's oldest boy asked me about the coaching years and actually wanted to hear the answers. At one point during dinner, Trevor stood up. "I want to say something," he said. The table quieted. Dad taught us for our whole lives that showing up is what counts. He showed up for every game, every practice, every bad grade and broken heart and dumb mistake. He showed up for Mom. He showed up on Christmas Day for 12 people he'd never met. We forgot that lesson for a while. He paused. "I don't think we'll forget it again." He raised his glass to Dad and to Mom for teaching us what love actually is. The table raised their glasses. I looked at Evelyn and the photograph in my wallet, the one I carry everywhere, laughing at Connor's wedding with her head thrown back. I put it down and picked up my glass. "There's something I want you to hear if you're where I was 2 years ago. If you've been making yourself smaller so other people can be comfortable. If you've been buying better wine and cooking bigger meals and putting up more lights, hoping someone will finally notice how hard you're trying. Stop. Not because I don't love you. They probably do, but they will love you better when they can see you clearly, and they can't see you clearly when you're bent into the shape of what they need. I'm 68 years old. I have a full calendar now. Woodworking class on Tuesdays at the community center. Saturday morning walks with Wendell. Dinners with Dorothy, who makes me laugh, in a way I didn't think I'd laugh again. Volunteer work with the Columbus Youth Football League on Thursday afternoons. My kids call me. Not every week, but when they do, it's real. Lily asks to come over and make cookies. Connor's boy wants to hear the coaching stories. Paige and I have a standing lunch on the first Sunday of every month. The house is still on Maple Ridge. I decided to stay, but it's mine now. In a way it wasn't before. Not a shrine, not a waiting room, a home. Evelyn's rose bushes came back strong this spring. Best they've looked in years. I don't know if you believe people can hear you when they're gone. I do. I think she's been watching this whole thing unfold with that laugh of hers, the one in the wedding photo. The one that was always a little bit like she knew how the story was going to end before anyone else did. We did all right, Ev. We did all right, Ev. We did all right. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any complicated philosophical way, just the plain, practical kind. The kind you learn after 68 years of watching people make choices and live with what those choices produce. Connor, Paige, and Trevor didn't set out to hurt me. I actually believe that. They set out to make their own lives easier, and hurting me was just the cost they'd decided I was too polite to invoice them for. That's the thing about people who take you for granted. They're not usually cruel by nature. They're just comfortable. And comfort, left unchecked, has a way of making us careless with the people who love us most. What I did that Christmas wasn't revenge in the way people usually mean the word. I didn't do it to make them suffer. I did it because I'd spent 4 years making myself smaller and quieter and more accommodating, and it hadn't worked. I'd been operating on the assumption that if I just tried harder, cooked better, decorated more, budgeted more of my pension, they'd eventually show up the way I needed them to. That's not wisdom. That's hope, dressed up as a strategy, and it doesn't hold. The moment I sat down at that table with Wendell and Dorothy and Hector and Lorraine and Darnell's family, I understood something I couldn't have understood any other way. I wasn't actually alone. I had just been investing my time in the wrong direction. That's a hard thing to admit at 68, that you've been walking toward a wall and calling it a door, but admitting it is the only way to turn around. The will wasn't punishment either. Even though Connor's jaw told a different story when I explained it, it was clarity. It was me deciding that the Evelyn Simmons Education Fund would do more lasting good in this world than passive income for 3 adults who already had more than they needed. There's something freeing about that decision. Something that has nothing to do with anger, and everything to do with finally understanding your own values well enough to act on them. What changed my kids wasn't the newspaper article. It wasn't the will. It was watching me not need them to be okay. That's the only thing that actually worked. When Trevor stood up at that dinner table months later and said what he said, it was real. Not because I pressured him into it, but because he'd had time to sit with the truth without me hovering over it trying to manage his reaction. If you're the kind of person who keeps trying harder when people keep showing up less, I want to say this as plainly as I can. Your effort is not the problem. Your direction is. You cannot pour your way into being valued by people who have decided your value is fixed. What you can do is redirect, build a life that doesn't require their approval to function. Tend the rose bushes. Set the table for the people who actually show up. Let the ones who need to wake up on their own time. That's what Evelyn always knew. She never chased anyone's affection. She just lived so fully and so generously that being near her felt like a privilege. I spent 4 years trying to replicate what she created without understanding how she did it. Turns out she didn't earn it. She just knew her worth. And she never apologized for it. I'm still learning, but I'm learning.